sure this sounds good. Give me a little sound check there, Tristan.
How's my sound? And the world lives on.
Can you
Oh,
believe how
Mr. Jones and me. The video. When I look at the television, I want to
Okay,
see
okay.
me.
We're good.
All right, good.
All right. Mr. Jones.
Alex Jones and me.
Pay paradise, put up a parking lot. Bop, bop, bop.
Practicing alliteration.
All right, welcome back to hour 2 for the subscribers. We were talking about the key players and characters and people that we wanted to get to. I've got a few more quotes I want to look at from old Davy Rockefeller, and I've got some more articles that popped up in the past few days. I'm going to cover 2. The World Health Organization has explained to us what a SimEx is, simulation exercises, and how important these are for combating these events when they happen. Well, it's just so convenient, isn't it? Much like simulations that occurred before the Big 9 event. Remember Vigilant Guardian, which just happened to be a simulation of the very event, the day of the Big 9. And immediately on the TV, they say, "Oh, we had no idea that there could ever be such an event as the events of," even though they were running the exact exercise during the event. Tell us some more about these strange, shady characters. We talked a little bit about Gil Bates. Tell us about Dr. F.
All right, so Dr. Fauci. Dr. Fauci is, I mean, he seems like this unassuming small little guy. He's kind of like
Right.
I don't know, he's like if Ron Paul lived in New York or something. I don't know. He's kind of like a
Well, I think we need to
79-year-old.
audit the Fed. Well, that's my Ron Paul. Go ahead. Well, we need to audit the Fed.
It seems about Ron Paul's age, maybe a little bit younger than Ron Paul, but Fauci, he's got his hands in a lot of different pots. Now, Fauci is very closely connected to the Bill Gates Foundation due to sharing board positions over the years with a lot of these groups, like the Global Grand Challenges, Grand Challenges. I'm sorry, grandchallenges.org. You can see the scientific board from 2003 to 2010. There are a lot of members of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation there. You've got the director of the National Institutes of Health, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, Elias Zerhouni was on the board there. Alan Bernstein, Global HIV Vaccine Enterprise. You've got a lot of board members from pharmaceutical companies, biotech companies, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, who run this Grand Challenges board. I think the Grand Challenges board is the Global Grand Challenges is a family of initiatives fostering innovation to solve key global health and development problems. And our boy, we've been seeing on TV every day, Fauci is a member there. I mean, another strange connection to Fauci, you can find some of the WikiLeaks documents have shown emails from Fauci to the Clinton Foundation and to Hillary Clinton's, I think it was her secretary. And in these, the direct quote from Fauci to Hillary Clinton, "I love you." Tell her I love her and how much I admire her and how brave she is. So Fauci, who, I mean, a lot of this, oh, it's the Democrats are doing this, it's the Republicans are doing this and that, and the Democrats are fighting the Republicans, that they don't want this, they want that. There actually is a lot more collusion in the real world, as you've documented on your on all of your material over the years. There's not really a divide between the left and right, the false political spectrum in the U.S., which is why Fauci is going to be, sitting there in front of Trump every day, talking about what policies we need to implement, but also working closely with Bill Gates and Hillary Clinton. Now, Bill Gates, should we trust Bill Gates, right? The big question, right? Should we listen to Bill Gates? He's been thrust in front of us as a media figurehead, especially over the last 10 to 12 years. And we're told that Bill Gates is just a sweet old philanthropist, right? You've got, he pulled himself up by his bootstraps, pulled himself up by his boomer new age New Balance bootstraps, grabbed his New Balances by the heel.
Well, if we kill off 25,000 million people, we'll have 25 million more pairs of New Balance for scientists like myself.
New Balance is actually making masks. Did you hear
Now,
about
it's been
that?
a large portion of the African population has been producing New Balance sneakers, but when we get the robot factories in place at Microsoft's building, I'll have the monopoly on all the New Balance.
It's beautiful. We need like a rap, like a Bill Gates rap.
We're gonna release the Smart Balance shoes, and they're gonna have the actual quantum dot vaccination in the shoe itself. It's just gonna spike you as you put the shoe on.
So here's yeah, we got Bill Gates, right? Should we trust this guy?
No.
And where does Bill Gates come from? That's another really important question. What is Bill Gates' family history? Something that a lot of people are starting to ask about now. And actually, I know, I think you know, Really Graceful. I think you've done something with her as far as collaborations go. There's a channel called Really Graceful on YouTube. She just made a pretty dang good video on the history of Bill Gates and what he was doing before Microsoft. So I would suggest anybody who's interested in this, check that out, because there are even some things in there that I hadn't heard, right? Like, for instance, Bill Gates' father, William Gates. Everybody knows he was, well, not everybody, but a lot of people know he was on the board of Planned Parenthood during the Margaret Sanger years, right?
Right.
Closely associated with Planned Parenthood, very into the idea of eugenics, which got rebranded as things like family planning,
Yep.
reproductive health services, aka baby slaying. You know, I mean, so he's involved in a lot of this stuff, but also on his mother's side, there's some very interesting stuff, right? So Gates' father married a woman named, I think, Mary Maxwell. She was called Mary Maxwell. And her grandfather was on the board of the Philadelphia Federal Reserve Bank and worked for Citibank. And she actually spoke fluent Chinese, if I remember correctly. So I mean, he comes from a moneyed family, very very influential, rich family of bankers and highly influential people involved in a lot of the setup of the financial mechanism, the machinations of the financial system in the early the 20th century, I guess you call it. So the Gates family very very connected. He's not just some rags to riches guy. He's not like, you know, this just genius child who you know who through his hard work and through his boomer elbow grease climbed the ranks of society and became one of the richest men in the world. He actually has been positioned as far as his family goes in a very privileged way. So Bill Gates, eugenics family connected to Microsoft.
I think Microsoft
Start,
too has an IBM background. I think there's a connection between somehow IBM, and then I think there was something to do with like trust being busted, and but to get around that, it became like, you know, these other things. So I think there's a background to that, to where it actually comes out of the wartime tracking and
yeah,
tracing kind of biometrics programs.
yeah. He went to Harvard. He's a Harvard guy, Bill Gates, and the story goes he dropped out of Harvard because he just, you know, he's such a renegade, right? He's a college dropout, didn't even finish his Harvard education because he was so busy trying to get personal computers in everybody's home. Now, the guy he worked with, the guy he started Microsoft with, what was his name? It was like Paul. Was it Paul Allen? What was that guy's name?
Something like that. I don't remember.
Okay, forgive me. So the guy he started Microsoft with, he's kind of an interesting character as well. There's a picture of Bill Gates when he's programming with his partner in Microsoft. This guy died in 2018, and he said that Bill Gates was so like a ruthless bully who tried to muscle him out of the company and, you know, basically take a fortune for himself while he was suffering with cancer. So Bill Gates also involved in a lot of scams and schemes with big pharmaceutical companies and certain pharmaceutical products, and was called out by an organization in Kenya for having tainted pharmaceutical injectable products that sterilize a lot of women because they contained HCG. Um, so like there were some interesting things with Bill Gates that maybe make you think, okay, this guy perhaps isn't this just great philanthropist that we should all trust and believe. But I think for normies, and if you're not so familiar with, or if you're talking to friends and family who are not so familiar with kind of like geopolitical stuff that Jay's been talking about, they haven't necessarily read Zbigniew Brzezinski, Grand Chessboard, the Between Two Ages, or Bertrand Russell. If they don't really understand all this stuff, a lot of these people have heard of Uncle Epstein, right? Jeffrey Epstein, everybody's favorite philanthropist, fellow philanthropist with Bill Gates, who just
Jeff
wants to
Stein
help the
Effrey.
world. Tristan this guy, heavily influenced by the eugenics movement, obsessed with eugenics. The New York Times wrote a piece about him being obsessed with
A
eugenics.
lot of people don't
He
know
was
this. Yeah,
very
they don't know that he was into this. They thought, oh, he's just some kind of sex blackmail perv guy. But no, he was actually into
no
this kind of crazy stuff.
cybernetics and eugenics. They have a very. And it's funny because when you look at the intellectual elite, the technocratic elite, they're all obsessed with cybernetics. They're all obsessed with eugenics. Why is this?
I'm going
Right,
to
the
pour a little
cybernetics.
bit more coffee. Can you keep going about Jeff Stein? Let me get a little more coffee.
Yep. I'll keep babbling. Um, so Jeffrey Epstein, obsessed with eugenics, wanted to. He was actually working on now. Some of this stuff. It sounds kind of fantastical, but the New York Times reported on this. He was working on programs to reseed the human race with his sperm, right?
Yes.
And he was obsessed with this, and he was doing a lot of this stuff out in his New Mexico ranch, which everybody talks about Epstein's Island. When you look deeper into the New Mexico situation, that ranch actually seems to be much more of an important stronghold for his international crime syndicate type activities, right? It's located on
This is
government
Bond
land,
villain
right?
stuff, dude. This is what
Crazy, right?
Hugo Drax does in Moonraker. Literally, the Bond villain.
Yeah.
He tries
Yes.
to depopulate and he tries to repopulate the earth with his own seed.
Yeah. So Epstein was obsessed with this. His New Mexico ranch was kind of, very strategically perched right there between a bunch of government land and land owned by other very influential people. I think the governor owned the land to the north of him. And the Clintons used to visit his ranch regularly, and they liked to stay in his Western themed ghost town. That was basically now it's a ghost town, but it was a Western themed.
Westworld, right? Like,
Dude, it kind of looks like that, right?
hey Jeffrey, could you send me over a bunch of those little hot little numbers dressed up as pigs and goats?
Robo hoes.
I'd
Really
like some
use a
of those
few robo
robo
robo hoes for an orgy. Don't give me the ones that bleed real blood though. So he's situated in this New Mexico estate. Um, and I think the Epstein connections to Bill Gates are fascinating as well. Bill Gates flew on his private airline, on Epstein's private airline in 2013, and he tried to kind of downplay it in the media. Said, "Oh, it was a huge mistake, flying in Jeffrey Epstein's plane. I just, I didn't really know what he was involved in." There's other interviews of Bill Gates saying he knows exactly, revealing that he knows exactly what Epstein was all about. He said, his lifestyle is a bit outlandish. I don't know if it would be for me. Something along the lines of that's the quote that Bill Gates has talked about Jeffrey Epstein's life. Now he didn't talk explicitly about the young girls and stuff like Trump mentioned several times, which is another strange connection there with Epstein. But he was very, very close with this character. Epstein also connected to Robert Maxwell. Epstein also connected to Ghislaine Maxwell, whose sister, Christine Maxwell, was involved with that Promise software. I think it was called the Promise
Promise.
software.
Yes, exactly.
Promise.
Done old
And
talks on
this,
this. Yeah,
this is really, really weird stuff. This was sold to intelligence agencies, and it was all about
backdoor.
sharing information among intelligence agencies, right?
It's backdoor information that they can get a backdoor basically into anything.
So we got another connection there. Epstein with cybernetics, with tracking and tracing and the monitoring human movement, human behavior, and blackmail type stuff, right? And also backdoors to intelligence agencies. So then Bill Gates and Epstein, very good friends. Epstein actually advised. This is on record, and there's New York Times articles, and I think Business Insider or something. Several articles about Bill Gates being advised by Epstein to donate $2 million to MIT Media Lab. Now, we all know MIT also recently came out with that article about we can never go back to normal. And this is going to be 18 months of, slow rollout and what was it, like a kind of a sinusoidal wave of outbreaks and lockdowns. And so it's kind of funny. MIT Media Lab, the head of MIT's Media Lab, I forget the guy's name, but he actually had to resign in shame because of the outrage over this whole incident. Um, and I think Jay's done a great job documenting MIT and a lot of connections there to. MIT's really big into AI.
Yeah.
A lot of this stuff, and they publish a lot of think tank type articles that become policy. I don't know. MIT is almost like the Rand
It's
Corporation of
kind of like
university.
DARPA. It's similar to DARPA with kind of pioneering where we go with the tech stuff.
Yeah, yeah. So Jeffrey Epstein advising Bill Gates to donate to MIT. Right, two guys obsessed with eugenics, two guys obsessed with or connected with very intimately people that are involved in surveillance, cybernetics software, and of course, Bill Gates software is everywhere. Like on the Windows 10 right here. Hey, Bill, using Bill's software right now. So guys like Bill Gates are very, very important for not just social engineering purposes. I'm so unassuming. If I just hold my hands like this and I have poor posture, you'll think that I'm not a threat because I can't really physically attack you because I'm a decrepit old pedo-looking dude who dresses like Mr. Rogers. But if I just talk like this, I can say things that are about genocide, and I can talk about killing loads of Africans and making you have forced vaccines and all this stuff, and nobody will really think about it. So you've got kind of a guy that's very, very his public image is very tailored. The way that he dresses, uh, the way that he presents himself, his posture, all of this. Yeah, that might be really him. That might be how he really is. But when you look at what he's actually into, what he's actually doing was actually funding. He's obsessed with depopulation. He openly talks about this. There's a clip of him from his TED Talk from 2010 saying that we do a really good job uh, with reproductive health services and
Vaccines, right?
giving everybody
The
television and vaccines.
stabs,
We
the
can decrease the
stabbies.
population. Exactly. The stabbing. If we ever do a really good job with this, we can decrease the population by 10, 15%. And then he goes on to make a joke, or earlier he makes a joke in the same TED Talk about he pulls up the magic population, the magic CO2 equation, right? So CO2, this toxic gas that they tell you is so bad, which you exhale, which every one of your kids is exhaling every day. CO2, which makes plants grow. And when there's more CO2 in the atmosphere, actually it enables more greening of the planet, more growth of vegetation because that's what plants breathe, right? There's a carbon cycle, right? Yes, you don't want to be destroying your soil and throwing a bunch of carbon from the soil into the atmosphere, right? But it's not the main driving cause of so-called climate change, right? But Bill Gates also, of course, while he's talking about CO2, and I'll get back to his equation, but while he's talking about CO2 and how bad CO2 is and how we're destroying the planet because we exhale CO2, he's one of the biggest funders of the corporations and organizations that are destroying the topsoil and liberating and bringing a lot of that CO2 out of the soil into the atmosphere. Not that I believe that that's the main driving force of climate change, that CO2 is toxic, but removing it from soil, that black, loamy material underneath your feet when you're walking through a forest, when you've got good quality soil that's built from pasture, from grasslands that are meant to have herds, massive herds of animals that are ruminating on it, taking the grass, chewing it up, and then pooping on the ground, trampling the poop. This is regenerating soil. Bill Gates is actually really big into the GMO stuff. His whole thing about feeding the world is all about GMO corn, GMO cotton, GMO soy,
Right.
and plant-based diets. He was one of the biggest investors in Beyond Meat, one of the biggest early investors there,
So
and he's
notice,
obsessed with.
notice. Let
Yeah,
me interrupt you real quick here. Notice that because a lot of people hear this stuff and they still don't get that at the top of these Fortune 100, there's not really competition. They think, oh, Microsoft is in competition with Apple and Cargill is in competition with Tyson Foods, but at the top of these companies, there's a unified plan. And most
yeah,
of these CEOs and these people, even the ones that have stepped down, it doesn't matter because the shareholders, the people who have the controlling shares, it's already been demonstrated back in, I think, 2000, 2001 with that Swedish study of the 147 corporations that can control the majority of the global economy. That was in 2001. We've seen a lot of consolidation since 2001, since that Swedish study, showing that there is, in fact, a tremendous amount of coordination and cooperation. That's why you'll see moral agendas, for example, roll out across the board globally in the Fortune 100 and Fortune 500. That shows us that there's not really at the top that competition that everybody thinks drives the system. There's a layer in the pyramid of competition that's allowed, but at the top, there's not competition. And that's why the people at the top, people like this guy and his family, people like Bill Gates in that 2015 talk. So we're going to have a lot more fairer world. It's going to be fair for everybody. There's not going to be
yeah,
competition because, as these people say, they don't like competition.
that's right. Yeah, what was Rockefeller's quote? Competition is a sin, right? and he meant that. They do believe
And
that.
Bill
They don't
Gates
want
says essentially the same thing. We're going to have
yeah.
a fair
Bill Gates
world.
also-
Everybody's going to have the same stuff. It's going to be equal.
You got to flatten the curve. You got to flatten the curve out. You want your women with no curves because they'll be infertile. But
They'll be
so
boy men, right? They'll be like this, right?
exactly, exactly. So yeah, these big companies that Bill Gates invests in are responsible for the destruction of your soil, are responsible for the poisoning of your land, of your water, massive oceanic dead zones caused by runoff from all this industrial agriculture shit that they're pushing. And yet Bill Gates says he's going to save the world. We need to go green, which basically is just greenwashing of industrial, mass-produced, consolidated, big ag, big pharma, which big ag and big pharma are the same thing. Right? That's why you have Bayer purchasing Monsanto. Bayer and Monsanto have had close relations for, I think, over 100 years.
Now,
Very, very close relationship between these big companies.
let me ask you a question.
And
So,
let me just say one more thing about that
yeah,
ties in what Jay just said. So people think that there's all this competition up at the top. All you should, if you still believe this, maybe go to the World Business Council for Sustainable Development's website, World Business Council for Sustainable Development, and look at the member companies. You got BP, Shell, Michelin, Cargill, Bayer, Monsanto, Amazon, Google, massive pharmaceutical companies, Merck, the Wellcome Trust is involved in and working with Bill Gates, and all these companies have similar agenda, and they're all on board with the Sustainable Development Goals, the Agenda 21, Agenda 2030, Future Smart City Grid, which everything you're seeing now, this is the end planned outcome for any crisis you see in the future. This is the end planned outcome that will be scripted into the response, whether these crises come about naturally and happen on their own, or whether somebody makes you think there's a crisis, whatever it is that's going on in these future crises, they're all going to be pushing towards the Sustainable Development Goals, which is essentially, it's like global homo techno fascia communism, right? It's
yeah, it's all
communist
those in one.
type policies implemented by the biggest companies in the world who have consolidated and monopolized the market. And just like Marx said, communism is end stage monopoly capitalism. That's what it is. What does it matter whether it's the fascists, bro? It's the commies, bro. It's like I said, fascism is when corporations take over the government, right? But communism is so different because that's when the government takes over corporations.
Right. Yeah, really.
So
Who cares?
yeah, so
Exactly.
that's kind of my Bill Gates rant there, and
Well, let me.
the
So
magic.
two things here. Did you get a chance to hear the interview that I did with Mark Hackard a couple weeks ago about Ghislaine's father, the famous spy Robert Maxwell?
No, how did I miss that one? I
Everybody,
did not get a
if you've not
notification.
heard this, it's in the members section. It's not public, so you can scroll down a few days if you're on YouTube to the members post, or you can go to Jay's analysis in the archives and you'll see the post there. So Mark translated a very rare Russian article on Robert Maxwell, and it's very important because it ties in a lot of the elements with Ghislaine and how Robert was basically doing the same type of operation as Epstein back during the Cold War. Same
Yes.
stuff, right? So they're just continuing on this legacy. Anyway, but so that's a good one to listen to tie some of these loose ends together, and then also. My take on a lot of the green movement is that yes, ultimately it's the depopulation, but in the immediate, it has the effect of consolidating and wiping out competition. Because
Yeah.
if you're these big companies, you can get regulations passed that might even hurt you as a company, but
Yeah.
you're willing to hurt yourself to get rid of the competition, and in the long run you can benefit because you can consolidate the market and buy out the competition. So the green movement has that advantage of consolidating power into smaller and smaller numbers of corporations, and then eliminating competition, and ultimately consolidating everything for the global technocratic government that we see. So, what is greenwashing exactly? Can you explain that?
Basically, it's kind of magical, right? I mean, it's kind of like a way of messing with people's perception about words and the meanings of words and language, right? If you just say green, like it's like when they rebranded.
Oh, the marketing campaign. In other words,
Yeah, think about like the word reproductive health services and what
yeah,
that really means. It's like, you know what I'm saying? It's like reproductive health services doesn't mean what it really sounds
Well,
like.
so Bernays renames the War Department the Department of Defense.
Yeah, yeah. So it's kind of a sleight of hand thing using words. And when you look at the green movement, right? The green revolution is big agriculture. The green revolution was big industrialized agriculture where they need huge chemical inputs, NPK fertilizers that are very, very destructive to the soil as well. And these all require things like loans from the World Bank, the IMF, so that farmers can afford these giant caterpillar built machines that they have to import from producers, you know, either in China, the US, these massive machines that are required to harvest grain. It's eventually led to things like genetic modification, right? So the green revolution led to the gene revolution, genetically modified foods. And I know you've talked about Engdahl's book, Seeds of Destruction, which I have somewhere over here, but that's a really good read, and it's not very long, and it is a very nutrient dense book about the bringing in of this new industrial agriculture system and the connections to the Rockefeller Foundation, right? The big foundations, the Rockefeller Foundation, Harvard, who Bill Gates comes out of. Bill Gates' father was also closely connected with Rockefeller. William Gates Sr., very close with Rockefeller. The photo of him with David Rockefeller Sr. and David Rockefeller Jr. And you know, he was 6'7" too. Bill Gates' dad, he's massive. Um, I don't think Bill Gates is that tall. His dad was 6'7", he's like this freakishly big
Gil
dude.
Bates was probably made in a test tube.
I think so. Not that confirmed right there. But yeah, so essentially greenwashing is a way of making you believe that industrial practices are somehow going to save the planet, right? Like the big ag and big pharma consolidation are going to save the world. So it's basically it's Bayer Monsanto's way of putting shrink wrapping their shit in green plastic and telling you it's going to save the planet if you buy it. You know, because they'll sponsor reproductive health services with their carbon credits when you purchase the Cargill and Bayer produced foods. It's essentially kind of the scheme.
Do you see the infrastructure in place though for this stuff, or how long do you think it would take them to? I mean, people like Atali, they have predictions of like 2030 to 2050. Do you think that what we're seeing now with this rollout is intended to move us in the next phase of putting in the infrastructure for this kind of global technocratic smart city thing?
The last couple of years, you and I have done quite a few streams, right? Talking about these things. We did the Blade Runner stream where we were talking about transhumanism. We've done several streams. I've been harping on this for a couple of years now because I felt like it was coming down the line. I felt like it was accelerating with all the Greta stuff, with all the talk about, um, you know, all this sustainable development goal stuff. And you seeing how much of the population was buying into it, and talking to friends and family, and seeing them slowly become more and more robotically radicalized into this rhetoric, and thinking that these are, you know, noble, great ideas. I was concerned that it was coming faster than I really thought it would be able to happen, right? Because where we live, it's like we live in this area where people grow their own food. Um, there's a lot of pesticides and stuff that get used, and the Bayer Monsanto reps have come in to Ecuador over the last few years, and I see it creeping in. You know, I see more and more. Even though like the Constitution of Ecuador bans GMOs, they've allowed them in the last few years. They've slowly um, started giving in. So I've seen it creeping, but the last few weeks, it's been like, you know, kind of emotionally difficult because just very frustrated and how quickly it's getting rolled out now and how quickly I see it coming now, right? Because with the economic situation that's being created right now with forced lockdowns and global house arrest,
Yeah.
um, you see rhetoric on TV, like you see these pundits saying, "Well, look, if your business can't handle 3 months of shutdown, you shouldn't be in business." Right. While at the same time, the government's printing money and giving it to these Fortune 100 companies whose businesses apparently couldn't handle it either. So it's
Yeah, that's a great
we're
point. Yeah.
seeing a wipeout of a lot of middle class businesses, and small family farms are being threatened more than ever. And after this, when we come out, what we're seeing now, and this is starting to build up, what we're seeing now is a lot of rhetoric about, you know, rebuilding the new world post CV, right? And you can I get YouTube. You can talk about coronavirus now as long as you don't spread like certain things. But I guess YouTube says we can talk about it now. So, um, but there's a lot of talk about can we like Extinction Rebellion's Twitter yesterday and every day they're posting stuff like we can't go back to normal. We can't go back business as usual. We cannot because it's destroying Mama Earth. It's destroying Gaia. Time was it Time or was it? I think Time magazine or one of those big magazines. Time I think has Greta Thunberg on the cover this month, and they just released the title and it's like it says the race for the race the I gotta look this up because it's like it's really crazy. Um,
The crisis, right? Like, so this is one of the patterns that we saw in
Rolling Stone.
all the
Rolling Stone.
globalism books have the pattern of you got to present this big crisis. We are all in a pure state of crisis, right? And if we don't, act now, the crisis is going to destroy humanity, which is ironic because, of course, they're the ones who want to destroy humanity. They have no interest in humanity, right? As people have been pointing out all week, uh, suddenly the people who want to depopulate are now concerned with saving our lives. Come on.
Hmm. Exactly. Exactly. So I'm pulling up this image now so everybody can see it. Where is that? Client. Uh, there. Here's Rolling Stone, not Time. Just as filthy trash of a magazine as Time magazine. Rolling Stone. Time magazine on acid is Rolling Stone, I guess. Or on a little bit more acid because
Yeah,
Time
man, it's
magazine
like the
has.
same kind of, yeah, it's the I can't imagine anybody still reads that, but yeah, it's total propaganda from the establishment.
Look at that cover, man. I mean, the cover, they use the Shepard Fairey. Remember the Shepard
Obama
Fairey
art.
artist? Yeah, so he sold out and did all that Obama art after he made that Obey. He used to do like some interesting kind of critiques of
Oh, really?
global capitalism and stuff, and then suddenly he was making art about how fantastic Obama is and made campaign posters. But and then here's
Now he's
Rolling
doing
Stone.
Greta.
Greta. I don't know if it's
This
actually
is so
him, but it's the
fake.
same
Like, who?
aesthetic.
I
Like,
can't
now or
imagine.
never. I like how the bottom it says the race to save the planet, right?
Always,
Which is
right?
kind of it's kind of hearkening to that eugenics, the master race type
That's what I'm
rhetoric,
saying. They
man.
always say in the books, the first thing they'll talk about is the crisis. We are in a crisis. Atali does it. Copra does it. All the eco freaks do it. Marilyn Ferguson does it. Salk does it.
Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, I see this stuff, and it's like, it kind of does upset me. I mean, there's not like salvation in the world. Like I don't think we're gonna,
Right.
like we're not gonna like, oh, we're gonna save the world. We're gonna get down. We're gonna get the real life extension technology, guys. We're gonna stop the globalists. Like I don't think that, there's gonna be salvation in this world. But it does worry me about my kids and the type of world that
Their
they'll grow up
future.
in
Yeah,
because
sure.
we're trying to like basically teach them how to raise
So,
animals and raise food, and this stuff is literally attacking this and demonizing it and wanting to remove our ability to feed ourselves, to move freely, and to think freely.
so Gates said yesterday in a big op-ed on Washington Post, it's time for a complete nationwide shutdown. Everything's got to go down for I don't know what he says, like a month or something like that. Um, until we get all these numbers down, he says, 2 weeks, excuse me, 2 months, 2.5 months. He says what we need. I think that more and more this just looks to me like an attack on the economy
Yep.
to bring in the next phase of this business model of taking us towards the
Exactly.
technocracy.
Nobody was buying. People were laughing about Greta. Everyone was saying, like this is crazy. There's an emergency, and we want you to act like your house is on fire. It didn't work, right? It didn't. Not enough people were falling in line. So, you see why we can't have good things. You guys wouldn't listen. You wouldn't listen to poor little Greta and the kind of Nazi style eugenics propaganda that they're pushing with her. So now we need this, and whether this is natural, man made, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what future events. Where they come from, because it's the response. It's the response that it comes from. I'm not saying the truth doesn't matter where things originate and whatnot, but I think it's very, very important to look at where they're pushing it and where they're going to push it, regardless of what the event is. This is the direction it's going. Economic overhaul, technocratic control over society. And now we're seeing the rhetoric. If you go online, you look at like YouTube, as there was a community post on this channel that I've never even watched. Now this is news or something, and it was about Bill Gates calling for lockdown.
Yep.
And the top comment that had like 800 or whatever likes, and all the comments below it were very supportive. It was something along the lines of, "Oh look, our president is too concerned with the economy,
See,
and this man who has so much to lose from the stock market, Bill Gates, is the only one out there spreading sensible ideas about how to stop this and save lives. Bill Gates, who says he wants to decrease the amount of human beings on this planet dramatically, and his number one stated goal with his philanthropy and all of his actions that he does about depopulation, he suddenly is the greatest advocate for grandma, and it just wants to save lives. Because you can bring the economy back, but you can't it's a little harder to bring people back to life."
yeah, the guy who says we should have death panels. Exactly.
Exactly. This is what we talked about the stream the other day. Dude openly advocated for death panel. What? Why should we keep grandma alive when we could pay 3 teachers to teach reproductive health services to the children? Why should we keep grandma alive when we could use those resources for something else? But that's called the death panel, and you're not supposed to talk about that.
Well, he says right here in his op-ed that the problem is that people can go interstate, that you can travel from state to state, and he says that we need this crisis to be abated over. He says it's going to take us 18 months to get the right quote stabby, right? So he wants the crisis to prolong so that he can sell you the stabby. That's what he's getting at here.
Yeah, and here they've already, so everything you're gonna see in the U.S. within a couple of weeks is already being implemented in the third world. That's what I think is so funny. It's kind of like the command and control stations that are all set up in all these vassal states through the State Department, and all these military bases all over. Who knows how the information is disseminating, but it does seem to be that, there you go, Fallout Revives talk of universal basic income. That's what they want. That's what it's about, right? Rations. You get rationed your kibble. You get rationed your time that you're allowed outside. You get rationed your time that you're allowed to engage and meet with other people and be with them in person, right? Because that's so dangerous, because you might infect them. Quantum dot tattoos. There you go.
Yep.
It's like this. So this was getting pushed. What's crazy is here in Ecuador, you have already got the next phase that we're going into is they're going to rate provinces with red, green, and red, yellow, and green lights.
Oh, like the terror warnings. Remember the terror warnings after 9/11?
Yeah. So it's going to be by provinces, and the lockdown is going to be, right, you'll have red areas, and that's where it's so bad, and you need more lockdown, like in the big cities like Guayaquil, and you're still not going to be able to travel in between provinces, but they might let some people go back to work in the areas that are less affected in our little in Soviet Ecuador, comrade. So it is happening quickly. This is a long response to a simple question. Yeah, I'm surprised and amazed at how quickly it's being rolled out, and I think that this event is being used to catalyze the reaction quicker than any other event we can think of, going back to 2001 and before, even World War One, World War Two. This is a perhaps more important catalyzing event that's very coordinated. And the more and more we see from Bill Gates, it seems like he's just DARPA's, like a DARPA mouthpiece, it seems.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's what those big tech companies are. Is at the root, they're kind of these front pieces for this inner sanctum of technocrat elite, and that's who really. I mean, they don't run everything on the planet, but they're trying to. That's the goal here.
Yeah, that's the goal, right? What's a full spectrum dominance? So that comes out of the Pentagon, that term, right?
That's their term. Exactly. Yeah. I also was reminded too. I was talking to Roosh the other day, and we had a good conversation. He reminded me of how there are discussions, and my buddy John from Hoaxbusters as well. They both noticed that the similarity to the AIDS situation. If you remember when AIDS was a so-called crisis back in the 90s, they were hyping AIDS like it was what we're seeing now, right? Like everybody's just going to be falling over dead, zillions of dead from AIDS virus and all this stuff. And they would make these crazy claims like, oh, it can just jump from the toilet seat to your, nose and all this. They were saying this initially, and then they would refine it and scale it back. Well, it doesn't do that. Oh, it doesn't actually transmit this way, that way. But there was all kinds of nonsense. And so I actually found, speaking of Ingdahl, it was at you could probably still pull it up at Global Research. An old, it was a declassified thing under Rumsfeld of a psychological warfare manual under Rumsfeld, where Rumsfeld said that in the future we'll have to use information operations, information warfare. He says on the model of the AIDS PSYOP. He actually talks about AIDS as a psychological warfare campaign. Let me see if I can find that. But that's fascinating because I was like, yes, that's exactly what they're doing right now with Corona. It's just like the AIDS psychological warfare campaign.
Right. And it's like, regardless of how bad it is as far as a contagion, regardless of how bad the contagion is the response, is the cure worse than the disease?
I found it. Here it is. It's called, I think the article is called The Pentagon's PSYOPs, Information Warfare Using Aggressive Psychological Operations. And in that, it'll have linked the, pretty sure that's it. There'll be a link to the under Rumsfeld document, and then it'll give you, this is it. It's called the Information Roadmap, and it'll have Rumsfeld talking about AIDS as a PSYOP. I'm pretty sure that's it. But here, I'll share the link with you if you want to see it. It's a good one to be aware of, because a lot of these PSYOP white paper documents, like we forget about them, but they continue to be relevant, because you'll notice that like they use the same plans and programs over and over and over. You know what I mean?
Yep. Yeah, I mean we've covered a lot here. This is a really valuable episode. I'd try to refer people to this in the future, and shill for your member section to make sure people sign up, because this is there's some deep stuff.
Appreciate that. Yeah, let me just screenshot this for everybody so they can see what this is. And it does talk about AIDS. If you want to look up this document, got the AIDS. Tristan, I got the AIDS.
Get them AIDS. Bill Gates has got loads of AIDS working for him.
So there it is. There's this thing, and a lot of people miss this one because, as you can see, it has a few shares and likes. But it's called the Information Operation Info Ops Roadmap. Is the document?
Isn't that funny? Info War, Mind Wars, and then you got the alt media platform.
Let me pull up and let me Control F AIDS real quick and see if I can find it. No, maybe not. Maybe it's not this document. Anyway, if it's not this document, you'll still find relevant information in this document, because it's one. Here it is. AIDS awareness. Yes. So it says AIDS awareness. A PSYOP in the past was often used to support government policy, such as the AIDS awareness programs. That's a quote from this Rumsfeld document there.
What does it even mean? Like AIDS awareness, cancer awareness, right? It's like you got all these big pharmaceutical companies, all these NGOs talking about cancer awareness, but why not cancer prevention? Because we know loads of things that cause that. We know loads of things that cause cancer, including glyphosate, which Bill Gates is so involved in spreading all over the world and getting sprayed all over all of our crops so that our children ingest it. It's known to be highly associated and correlated with autism. In places where there's a lot of glyphosate use, people's gut is getting wrecked, and you're seeing very high autism rates around these fields that are sprayed. And we've had lawsuits in California, several lawsuits against Monsanto, where Monsanto had to pay out billions of dollars to people because of it is known that their product glyphosate is a known carcinogen, and yet everyone's talking about cancer awareness. How about avoidance? How about we get rid of some of these things from the public? Some of these things that are marketed towards us that we know cause cancer. I mean, you got Johnson & Johnson talking about developing new stabbies, and Johnson & Johnson was knowingly selling baby powders that had carcinogens in them for years, in the middle of a lawsuit, I think right now with that.
Wow.
So I mean, it's just, the AIDS awareness, cancer awareness, right? Information awareness. That's one of those kind of Pentagon terms, right? Information awareness, full spectrum dominance. And that's what really this is about. This is about
mastering the human domain. That's another one.
Yeah. So this is about
the program
like
that
the curve is a new one.
Air Force program.
So this is really, it's about what's happening now. You're going to get rolled out. People are going to be begging for surveillance of their neighbors, of their friends and families, their contacts. The WHO is out there. Tedros from the WHO. You can find his tweets today talking about we need to track people's contacts, right, and figure out who's been infected and test everybody in the world. Right, let's get DNA samples from everybody, and then we'll tell you, we'll put it into our little black box, our little Microsoft black box, and it'll tell you if you're infected or not, right? But of course, we should trust that. We should trust that and just believe that their tests are accurate, that they're testing for the right thing, which they haven't even told us what a lot of these tests. What are you testing
Mm-hmm.
for? How are you testing? Are you just testing for general coronavirus, which is the common cold? Are you testing for the specific novel coronavirus, the CV-19? We need to be informed about these things, and yeah. I think really what it comes down to is surveillance is going to get pushed really hard now. If they push it far enough, rationing of food, and that's how they'll bring in their the planetary guidelines for a plant-based diet, where your beef, your livestock are going to continue to be demonized, and if you own animals, they're destroying the planet. We got to get rid of those. Look at the wet markets. This all started in the wet markets, even though it's
Right.
been proven that that wasn't patient zero was not from the wet market. They tested all the animals there. They didn't find this virus in a single one of them. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, it's just this is theory. And we're told that this is scientific fact. The experts say that it started at the wet market. And what is the result? Well, people are talking about banning wet markets in China, which is a main source of income and
Yeah. Right.
food
Yeah.
and viable nutrition for millions of Chinese people. So they're going to be forced to eat what? What are they going to be forced to eat? Are they going to fall in line with the WHO,
And it's
Tedros's advice that we should all eat a plant-based diet?
and last year, what did we see rolled out? The social credit system, and this is all connected
Yeah.
because they want to. China's the model. China's the test tube. Once they roll this stuff out there, they roll the same thing out in the U.S. So I would
Yep.
say that that's what they really want to push is to get us on that social credit system, which will be integrated with the UBI. All right, Tristan, thank you so much. I think I will be on with you tonight later on, right? We're going to
Yeah.
talk about transhumanism. So, everybody, if you would, be sure and subscribe to Tristan's channel. I know you guys know who he is, but all you members are the backbone of Jay's analysis, and we want to thank you, and we want to support our friends like Tristan and Aaron and Melissa and everybody over at ACR Hesher and Sports. So be sure and support those guys as well. And Tristan, anything you want to leave us with?
No, no. I mean, I could sing Creed. Imagine,
I got it.
imagine,
I got it. How would Scott Stapp from Creed sing Imagine?
imagine all the people living in Walmart.
Oh, that's awesome. All right, so look forward to maybe you and I will be on the same aisle in our little coffin apartments within the giant Walmart megaplex city
I
that
don't
we
think
live
so,
in.
man. I think they'll select us. They'll make sure we're in completely different regions, right?
Oh,
You're not allowed to talk to these people. You could create social contagions if you get too many people critically
ooh,
thinking
good point.
together. You
Good
know,
point. Yeah, so I won't be around you in the Walmart.
nah,
All right,
dude.
man. Have a good day, and I'll talk to you later. Thank you to everybody. Be sure and like and share and subscribe. Not this one because this is for subscribers, but like and share the public one if you would. Thanks, guys.